What's up, everybody? Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video. And in this video, we gotta break down 3 huge mistakes for every single role. So whether you're a DPS, a tank, or support, or you're just trying to crush your priority queue so you get the maximum amount of passes, we have the 3 largest mistakes for each role that if you don't fix, you are just going to be unable to perform effectively on these roles. So we're going to be breaking it all down. Now kicking it off with none other than the DPS, which by the way stands for damage per second, but I know that a lot of you get teammates that might do damage per minute or damage per game. You know, very little amount of damage is coming out from them. But let's give them some tips to become more effective as a damage dealer entirely. Now the first one, and this one's incredibly important and a big mistake that a lot of damage dealers make, is that they are overly dependent on both shields and heals. And they might be thinking, hey, aren't I supposed to play around my healers? Aren't I supposed to play around my shield tank? I need a shield tank to do damage, right? Well, right and wrong. Now, I'm not saying that you can't use heals as a resource to be more aggressive. And I'm not saying you can't use shields as a way to use that artificial cover to do damage to the enemy when they can't do damage back to you. But what I am saying is that if you become overly dependent on these things, you become a very feast or famine type of player. What I mean by that is when you get the right heals and the right tank and the right space, you are effective in one game. And that leads to these games where you're popping off, dropping 30 plus bombs, and you feel like you're hard carrying, right? But then there's another game where you feel like no matter what you do, nothing happens, nothing gets done. And that's because you as a DPS are very dependent on a certain type of space creation, a certain type of heals that you cannot adapt to the ever-changing nature of ranked. And this is something that I had struggled with in the past big time. And if you do not fix this big mistake, you're never going to be able to climb very far as a DPS player. So definitely iron this out. Now moving on to the second big mistake that DPS players are making is they get really greedy and pursue, and then they overextend and die rather than just pressuring out enemies. For example, you're playing with your team as McCree, and an enemy peeks from that high ground, and you shoot him, you get him really low, and he starts to back up. Well, he probably backed up to heal, he probably backed up to peel, but because he was low, in your mind, you're like, oh, I'm going to take an off angle, I'm going to wrap around, I'm going to finish this guy off, and because you go for that play, you actually get yourself killed. But guess what? You already did your job when you zoned that guy away. You forced that guy to back up, you allowed your team to push forward without taking any damage, and that really sets you up for the next engagement. But because that person backed up and got peel, and you overextended trying to pursue them, now you're the one that's dead, and now you're no longer there to actually force that DPS back again in the future, which means your team is just going to get rolled and smoked. And this is really important that you need to understand. Yes, there will be times that you can push up and confirm a kill, but just pressuring out enemies is always your primary job, and if you put yourself in a scenario where you get too greedy and die, and you can't do that pressuring out, you no longer can protect your teammates that rely on you for protection. Now, the last big mistake that we have for the damage dealers is you need to be engaging based on pressure and using your teammates pushing in, not going in as a solo one-man army, taking all the aggro, not really getting anything done, and dying before your team engages. Now, this is a big problem on any character, but you see it most with a character like Tracer, for instance, where a Tracer goes way ahead of their team. They go and they say, hey, I have 3 people on me, 3 people on me. They say that for like 30 seconds. They die, and they're like, what the heck, guys? What are you doing? There's 3 people on me. Well, the thing you need to understand is just distracting and pushing in and pulling people back is not going to be enough to consistently win team fights. It's far better to get definitive value in the form of kills by using the pressure and space that your teammates make as they push in, and when your team pushes in, you have a much easier job as a DPS because a lot of people and resources are going to need to be put in other places rather than all focused on you, which is just going to make your job easier. Now you might be asking, okay, what if my teammates never push in? I have a tank that's not moving anywhere. I got supports that are just pocketing the tank that's not moving anywhere. What do I do? Well, a lot of the time you can actually play for peel instead, where your team is playing there and the enemy team is going to try try to make a play on your team because your team's not doing anything, your team's standing there, and you can use them engaging your teammates as the catalyst to then engage on them, trying to turn the tides of the battle. Instead of going out aggressively, you're playing more passive and looking for an opportunity that is created with the conflict, and that's really the idea here, is you're waiting for the conflict to happen so the enemy team is distracted and you have easier time doing whatever you want to do. And of course, you're going to get the glory in the end of the day. You're going to get all the kills, you're going to pop off, but it's about choosing the right time to pick your battle. Now moving on to the next role that we have for you, and this is a role that's often misunderstood, but incredibly impactful, and it's the tanking role. Now, the first big mistake that tank players are making a lot, especially at the lower ranks, and it's not creating space and standing too passive. Now, we've went over space a million times on this channel, and we have tons of guides about that, but basically that's just the areas on the map that you control, your team can push up, your teammates can get better position, and you are just in a better stance to do or be more effective in whatever you're supposed to do, whether that's healing, damage, or whatever. Now, the thing is, a lot of tank players are going to say, hey, well, when I try to push in, no matter what I am, I just get deleted. Well, one, that's part of the reason why there's some tanks in the meta that are more self-sufficient but can still create space, aka Hammond, which I would highly suggest, by the way, as just a very good solo carry tank. But in general, you need to make sure that you're balancing your resources, your base health, and natural cover. For instance, you want to run from one area to the next, one cover to the next. Now, what you need to do to get there is allow some of your base health to take damage, some of the shield health to take damage, and allow that shield health to remain up so you have it in case enemies engage on you or in case enemies use cooldowns on you, and then you want to charge those things back up when you are further behind natural cover. Now, there's a lot of different ways to create space depending on what type of tank you are, but the idea is taking on aggro, and we just talked about it previously in that Tracer example. Remember that scenario where there were 3 people on that Tracer and that Tracer died? Well, there can be 3 people focusing on you as a tank, but if you're getting resources by your support, you can stay alive. You can take that pressure and remove it from the other players on the board, aka your off tank or maybe your DPS. They have more space because they have less eyes on them. They can make more plays, and it's just going to go a lot better for you. You might think, hey, if I do this, I'm going to die, but hey, if you don't do this and you just stand passive, you're going to die anyways, and your teammates are never going to get the opportunity to put pressure back on the enemy, because maybe the enemy does push into you. They're like, hey, he's standing there, he's pushing in, let's just all go at him, but your teammates get to push in as well. They get to put pressure back. They might get picks and kills, and a lot of times if you're playing too passive, you're never giving your teammates a fair shot at making this a reality. Now, the next thing that you need to be doing as a tank, and that's optimizing your hero pool for your map, supports, and DPS. Unfortunately, there are not that many tanks in the game, and a lot of them aren't very interchangeable. Some maps favor certain tanks, like with verticality. A tank that is a lot better at scaling that verticality will be a lot better at creating space there. And when you think about what DPS and supports you have, some tanks just aren't going to work with certain DPS very effectively. You're playing Rein, but your 2 DPS are like, I don't know, Genji and Tracer. That's going to be pretty hard to make work, and they're not going to be very effective at playing around you at all, which means your space is not really creating the same amount of impact that maybe another character like Wrecking Ball would be creating. Now, the best way for me to put this would be that you are the frame that everything fits into, and a lot of times if there's a big disconnect between the frame and the pieces that are in the frame, the entire composition are just trying to do different things, pulling each other in different directions. And as a tank player, it is really important for you to have the game sense, that knowledge, to identify what's going on, why is something not working, is there any other character that you can play that will better enable your team? Because remember, as a tank, you're fundamentally working a lot less on mechanical skill and much more on your understanding of the game as a whole. Now, moving on to the last thing, the last big mistake that tank players are making all over the place, and they don't understand the value of their ultimate. You see, a lot of times when you're playing a tank, let's say you're playing Reinhardt, or maybe you're playing Zarya, or whatever tank you're playing, in a lot of games, you might feel completely worthless. There's a lot of things that you're pushing in, your team's getting the kills, but you're not doing a lot of things. You're making that space, but you're not getting the kills. You don't feel like you are making an impactful difference. But I will tell you one way that you absolutely can carry games, and that's your ultimates. Tank ultimates are among the most powerful, if not the most powerful in the entire game. Think about how many games you've lost to an Earthshatter, or how many games you've lost to a Graviton Surge, or a Gravitic Flux, or whatever. The list goes on, because tank ultimates are very, very powerful, and it's really important that you convert this on as many team fight wins as possible. This means that Ryan v Ryan fight, very important for you to win. That's the way that you can carry that game. This means making sure that your Graviton Surges never get eaten, never get reflected, always have an ultimate combo lined up, and you talk and coordinate that. Whatever you have to do to make it so that your ultimates are directly converting to team fight wins, and you're getting the full value out of the potential of these ultimates, that's how you carry games, and that's how you make a difference on tanks in those games that you feel like you're useless and you don't have a lot of value. This will be the one place where you really can change your impact in the game. You could change the entire course of the game based on doing this correctly. Now moving on to the last role that I wanted to talk about, and it's last but certainly not least, it's the supports. Now, I feel like supports is one of those roles that a lot of players don't really tap into what a support can do until they get into the upper ranks, unlike a lot of the other characters or roles where people tap into that potential a lot sooner, in my personal opinion. Now, let's talk about the first big mistake on supports, and it's about using health as a resource. And this is a really interesting concept that not a lot of people really grasp until it's laid out like this. So let me explain. If you win a team fight and all your teammates are at half health, is there any difference between you winning a team fight and your entire team at full HP? Well, assuming the spawn is far and the entire team is wiped out on the enemy team, no, there's not really much of a difference. I mean, you're going to build ult charge if your team's at half, you're going to fill them up, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, you won that team fight. And this is what I'm talking about. That's why health is a resource. It's a resource to get the job done, and the job is winning the team fight. Health isn't the goal. Having full health isn't a goal. Getting all your teammates to full health isn't the goal. The goal is winning the team fight. Now, basically, the reason I say this is while it is important to make sure that your teammates don't fall victim to breakpoints, you do not have to be topping people up 100% of the time, all the time, and only looking at the backs of your teammates, making sure that they're all at that premium 100% health. Most of the time, all they need is heals at the proper time, not all the time. And if you can give heals to people that need it when they need it, just a burst here or there, you have so much more time in between that to do more. And this leads me directly to the second big mistake on supports. I can't reiterate this enough. Supports are supports. They're called supports and not healers for a reason. And the reason is, supports have some of the strongest, if not the strongest, solo abilities in the entire game. Now, I want you to really think about what type of abilities I'm talking about here. Immortality Field is one amazing example, one of the most powerful abilities in the game right now. Now, let's talk about something like Speed Boost, which can help you overrun an enemy, chase them down. Incredibly powerful at getting through choke points. Anti-Nade Sleep Dart, I don't even have to talk about those. Those can win fights or shut down ultimates by themselves. On top of that, we gotta talk about Discord, which can turn a dive that just gets healed up into a dive that cascades and kills the entire enemy team. You see what I'm talking about here. Because these abilities are so powerful, a lot of the time, they can have a profound effect on whether or not you get that job done, quote unquote, or win that team fight. And if I already pointed out to you that life is a resource, you don't need to make sure that everyone is fully topped up all the time, and that your abilities can actually be the game changer, that maybe instead of topping up that tank from 550 health to 600, or that DPS that already is at nearly full, and using the mid time to effectively get some value out of your abilities, that can be another factor in turning the team fight in your favor, which ultimately, over the course of many team fights, means you're going to win more of them. Now, there are going to be some times when you get overwhelmed, and there's going to be some times that you fail at doing this, where maybe you misjudge something and someone dies when you could have kept them alive. But if you don't push yourself to up that APM, actions per minute. You don't push yourself to try to make sure that no one dies, everyone is healed enough to survive, but you're doing as much as you possibly can with your abilities. You will never reach the pinnacles that supports can have unless you really push yourself in this regard. Now moving on to the last big mistake that support players make all the time, and sometimes it is correct to babysit. I'm not going to lie, if your tank is under pressure and you realize that's the win condition, sometimes it's correct to pump and pump and pump them, and sometimes it's correct to do that with DPS as well, especially if maybe you have one hit scan and he's the only one that can really fight that Pharah, and if you keep him alive, he can do his job, shut down the Pharah, and then you can move on. But sometimes, and this is the hard thing that you need to identify, sometimes you have to cut off poor limbs that are just not necessary to win the team fight in the middle of the team fight. Now, this is really going to get kind of deep here, but basically, if you can identify the win condition for the fight, sometimes it's better to protect that win condition and focus in on that instead of trying to do everything and failing in a very complicated team fight. Let me give you a perfect example. Maybe you know that you have Grav Dragon, the enemy has no defensive ultimate, but all your teammates are incredibly low here. Now, you can't possibly heal everyone up, but what you can do is protect that combo. You can put all your resources into pocketing that Hanzo and pocketing that Zarya, at the very least, making sure that they are healed to a level where they will not get insta-killed, and keeping them alive to protect the win condition, which is Grav Dragon. Now, maybe your McCree off to the side dies, and he gets pissed off. Maybe your Monkey that is jumping to the far right dies, and he gets pissed off. But does any of that matter if your team that is still alive, or your teammates that are still alive, get a 4-man dragon and win the team fight? No, it does not, and that is very important. As a support, you have the power to decide who lives and dies, and that is why it's so important for you to quickly and accurately decide the win condition, decide what you can do, and decide what you need to do in order to make that a reality. But thank you so much for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I love your faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.